We have some people that are on. If you would mute your mics until it's time to talk. When you do have something to say, please go ahead and hit video so we can see you, and then we'll call on you at that time. Council members that are on, just simply raise your hand, and we'll move forward that way. During the public comment section, there'll be 3 minutes. There'll be a green light, red light, and we'll have 3 minutes. So if you do have a public comment, please state your name and your address, and we'll move forward from there. We do have a action item on this work session, so we are going to take roll call.
Larson?
Here.
Cameron? Here. Hoffman?
Here.
Lyman?
Here.
Mann?
Here.
Weimer?
Here.
Westwood?
Here.
Okay. We'll start off with Resolution 3550, Stormwater Facilities Improvement Environmental Assessment. James, do you want to give us a quick overall on this?
Yeah, I'll give you a quick rundown. It's basically, it's an evaluation of whether there's a need for environmental assessment. For the Stormwater Master Plan, we don't have floodplain or hazardous materials anywhere in the vicinity, so we would not need to do one. And we do have Brandon Duffy from Great West Engineering online here, and he could speak to it a little bit more.
Brandon, would you speak to that some more for us, please?
Sure. As James mentioned, what the resolution is saying is that we are accepting that the environmental assessment that we completed is enough environmental stewardship that there's nothing that warrants any further environmental investigation associated with the stormwater project. So we're basically saying we don't need to go to the next level, which would be an EIS. As I summarized last council meeting, we submitted comments to a bunch of federal, state, and local agencies to get comments back on it. Those are noted in the EA. We also published it and left it open for public comment. We received no public comment, positive or negative, related to the project. And our recommendation to the city would be to accept that the EA is an adequate level of environmental assessment. So that's what that resolution is for, and that will be, if signed, that will be sent on to TCEP as part of the TCEP application. This whole process stems from the TCEP application that we submitted back in June.
Thank you. Questions from the council? Dave.
I have one.
Dave, I called on Dave first.
Okay.
I had a couple questions in the fourth whereas. It currently states the city has determined that the stormwater facility improvement project will not significantly affect the quality of the human environment. And I'm thinking our wording needs to clarify that it's not going to negatively impact that, because I don't really want to create a document that says this project isn't going to impact human environment and then explain to people why we need to spend a bunch of money on it. The second part is that the second part of that sentence is the city has determined. Ideally, I'd like to see that say city staff or specific rather than just a vague entity. That was all I had on the whereases.
Okay. Any other comments? Mary? Oh, go ahead.
I think Rob had a question, didn't he, before me?
Rob, do you have a question, Rob?
Yeah, Bill, it was brought to my attention. Is the city of Red Lodge $12 million in debt?
No.
I had just heard that from a few different people, and I wanted to clarify that.
Okay.
And another big concern that keeps coming up with life as it is right now and the uncertainty of money coming in, a lot of people feel like it's not a good time to be taking on a big project. And just with the storm drain, I realize that we're having to treat a lot of water is the big deal about this. Well, anyways, that's it.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Mary?
Is there an urgency to get this passed before our regular business meeting scheduled for August 11th?
You want to speak to that?
Yes, the deadline for the TSEP grant that Brandon spoke to is, I believe it's August 10th, just before the meeting.
It's August 3rd, so we need to have it submitted by Friday.
Any more comments? Comments from the public?
The motion.
We need a motion.
Move to approve Resolution 3550 to accept the determination that the environmental assessment, AL assessment, is appropriate for the stormwater facility improvement.
Second.
Move to amend the fourth whereas to read, whereas the city has determined that the stormwater facility improvement project is not anticipated to negatively impact the quality of human environment.
Second.
Discussion on the amendment?
I agree actually with Dave on that. I think that makes sense. Add that word.
Any other comments? Comments on the amendment? We'll vote on the amendment.
Cameron,
Yes.
Hoffman,
Yes.
Simon,
Yes.
Mahan,
Yeah.
Weimer,
No.
Westwood,
Yes.
Back to the original motion. Any comments on the original motion with the amended language? Roll call.
Cameron,
Yes.
Hoffman,
Yes.
Yes.
Mahan,
Yes.
Weimer,
No.
Westwood,
Yes.
Okay. Mary Cameron wanted the mayor's directive for COVID-19 up for discussion. Mary, you want to start the discussion?
Sure. Actually, I'd ask if we could discuss having a resolution of the council. But now that you bring it up, I did see your statement that you issued. I'm not sure which date you issued that. Maybe, was it this week? Was it last week? I did notice that, and I've gotten some comments about that it's not a directive, it's not an executive order, and there's a $500 fine, possible fine per occurrence, and I couldn't find that in the governor's directive, and I wondered how that comes about with just
That came about during a discussion we had with the county attorney, the county health officer, our county commissioner, Chief Wells, myself, and that was the determination they came up with during that meeting, and that's how it came about.
So who issues the citation with the fee amount?
That would be through the county attorney.
So the county attorney issues the citation.
Yes.
How is it brought to his attention? Who collects the information?
That's up to the individual store owners. If they have somebody that is not wearing their mask in there, and or somebody that just observes somebody in there and takes a picture and passes that along to the county will investigate it and make their determination from there.
Mr. Mayor, this states that the business owner is the one that gets the citation, the criminal penalty by the county attorney.
That's correct.
So I don't think it's the business owner I think the business owners, from my understanding of the governor's directive, the business owners can call local law enforcement if somebody refuses to leave or is causing some kind of trouble over not wearing a mask, and then they can be charged with something. The customer could be charged with trespassing or disorderly conduct or some other thing. But
So you're talking about two different things.
Yeah.
First of all, if somebody's in a business where the masks are required according to the directive, and that store owner does not ask them to leave or put their mask on, then that's the $500 to the store owner.
Okay.
If they confront that person and say, please put a mask on, the person says, I'm not going to, I'm going to continue shopping, then that goes into a trespass. And that
Okay,
person
so
will be
the $500 is another customer calling, who do they call? They call the county attorney?
dispatch.
They call dispatch to report a business owner that's ignoring the governor's directive.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Dave?
I had several questions from pretty irate business owners along this too, and I was not able to speak to it. I think part of the confusion was that this was based on a directive from the governor, and then they got a letter from the city that says if you don't align with the governor, then the county is going to come after you. And part of what I got was, what is the city's role and why is the city stepping in? And just so sharing that information is, there was confusion about that because originally on their first read it, they thought the city was going to fine them. And my response was, we hadn't passed an ordinance, so I didn't think that was the case. And that's when they revisited it. And when I revisited it and found that it was indeed the county, but I think it was confusing that this came from the city rather than the county. I'll just share that as my thoughts.
And I will say, I sent no letters stating that at all. I made a comment in the paper, just putting the information out.
There was a directive put out by Google Groups, and that there's a letter that says from Mayor Larson. If you're not aware of that, then.
Yeah, I am.
Yes.
That is the same as the press release that we sent out. Mary?
How will the Red Lodge Police Department work with local merchants to ensure the directive is properly enforced? Has there been a procedure that because it says the Red Lodge Police Department will work with local merchants. So is there a contact for them to call and a procedure for them to check off this is what we're expecting?
They need to call dispatch.
They need to call dispatch and require the Red Lodge Police Department, because your statement specifically states the Red Lodge Police Department.
Yeah, well, so we've had some calls that came through dispatch, and our officers have done the education with the store owners, educating them in what the directive means, and those store owners have been very cooperative.
Would you like me to explain that directive, and maybe that would answer one of the questions?
Sure. Rebecca?
Okay, the directive is set up in such a way that it is the county attorney and the local public health officer's obligation or requirement under the law to enforce the governor's directive. The directive does not point out, if you look in the definitions, there's no definition for a person that is has a mask or doesn't have a mask. It explains in the definitions businesses, government offices, what a face covering is, indoor space open to the public, and then organized outdoor activity and sponsors. And then it gets into the fact that in indoor spaces that are open to the public, everyone should have a mask on. If you're in a restaurant, though, you can remove it to eat. It goes into, and this is where I think a lot of confusion came in, face coverings aren't required for outdoor activities. So if people are walking down the sidewalk, there's not a requirement that they have to wear the face mask. Now, if it's an organized activity and you can't social distance, then you're supposed to wear a face mask. So, and then if you get into groups of 50 or more, then there is, they just define that as, even if it's not an organized event, then it falls under the directive. The interesting thing is there are exceptions to wear face masks. Children don't have to wear those if under the age of 5. People that are eating food or consuming drinks in an establishment that offers food or drinks for sale. If you're in some kind of activity that is impractical or unsafe, like running, jogging, riding bikes, swimming, you can't wear a mask at those times. Also, if you're dealing with someone who is speech impaired or hearing impaired, not speech, and read lips like I did with Mr. Lyman last time. If we're in close proximity or in the same room or in the same area, I can ask him to remove his mask so that I can read his lips. If it's engaging in some kind of cultural things and you got to stay 6 feet away and not wear one. If you remove it for identification purposes, so in court, sometimes that's the necessary thing. If you were testifying in court, the face mask would not be required there. And then medical treatment, and then if you have a medical condition that precludes the wearing of a face mask, and that would be asthma, COPD, things that make it hard to breathe. So the one thing nobody's answered yet for me is, where does HIPAA and ADA come into play with that? Because if an individual says, well, I can't wear a mask, I have asthma, I can't breathe, I don't see that under federal laws that businesses are going to be able to question you or even throw you out at that point, because that creates a whole nother liability of your rights under HIPAA and the Americans with Disabilities Act. So I know a lot of businesses are concerned. I actually had a call today from Zip Trip Synex's Human Resources out of Coeur d'Alene, trying to figure out how to deal with this, because it's a lot easier said than done to enforce it. And then if you go on into the, now talking about enforcement, in the number 5 of the directive, it cites Montana Code and says that the public health directives are to be, or the Department of Public Health and Human Services, Title 50, is responsible for enforcing this, along with the Attorney General, which would be the State Attorney General, the Department of Public Health and Human Services, the County Attorney, or other local authorities under the direction of the County Attorney. So I think that's where Dr. George falls in, is he would be under the direction of the County Attorney, Alex Nixon, to enforce provisions of this. So it goes on to say, and interestingly, is that local public authorities and law enforcement are to educate people. And that's not 5 of it. It doesn't charge everybody that doesn't wear a mask. But it says to their enforcement should focus on education, providing warnings and educations about the risk of transmission, and to reserve a position of the penalties to trespass enforcement and other enforcement only for the most egregious repeat violations that put the public at risk. So that comes into a question of, if somebody walks into the store without a mask or refuses it, is that an egregious repeat violation that will put the public at risk? So there's so much that makes this hard for businesses to deal with. I had talking with the Cenex guy from Coeur d'Alene today, he did say that people have become violent when you're asked to wear a mask, and if you say, no, I'm not wearing one, and you ask them to leave a business, that some have become violent. So it's like, where do you put the employee safety and the public not wearing a mask? How do you balance that? And I didn't have an answer to that. You know, it's how do you do that when your employees are at risk? So the most egregious repeat violators are the things that will be the ones that should be under this directive getting any kind of large penalty. And I believe under, Jason can help me with this, I think under that code section that gives, explains the county attorney and the county health officer's authority, I believe under that is where the penalty section was the $500 or something. So I didn't look at that, but the penalty part under that as well as the trespass enforcement. So my understanding is that the police have said, you know, if there's somebody that causes a problem, you call 911, take a picture of them if you can. The problem is if it's a visitor, you're not going to be able to enforce, I mean, you're not going to be able to charge somebody with it. But it's up to the businesses to do their best. They can refuse service. So if somebody comes in with a mask, without a mask into a restaurant, and you say, Mr. Bushnell, sir, you need to put your mask on, and Jim says, I'm not wearing a mask, then you can politely say, okay, well, you have to refuse your service because, you know, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. If they leave, that's simple. If they don't, you dial 911 and have the police down, especially if they refuse to leave the building. If they leave, problem solved. And that is actually directed about refusing service on page 5, that indoor spaces open to the public, they're entitled to reasonably rely in good faith on the representation of a customer. So somebody walks in that has COPD, whatever, you know, has a health reason, or has faced some type of trauma in their life. And this is something I had not thought about before, reading some information, but victims of sometimes of domestic violence, rape, PTSD survivors cannot have something over their face because it causes major problems for them psychologically. So this is saying if a customer walks in and says, I have PTSD or I can't wear that due to my health, then the business owner can reasonably rely on that in good faith that that person is honestly representing that they cannot wear a mask for health reasons. So that is, and also it states that is affirmative defense. So the business is not going to get in trouble for somebody saying, I can't wear a mask. The refusal is the problem that you have to call and try to document who it is if possible. And the police can't be everywhere all the time. So, that, you know, that's why it's important for the business owner needs to trespass somebody to get a picture of that person. If it's a local and they know who it is, then they can report that to dispatch and his police department would turn that over to the county attorney. But the enforcement of it, there's most of it, because it is the directive, it falls into the public health department of public health and human services. That's why it's falling onto the county attorney and the public health officers more of the enforcement of it.
Thank you. Mary.
I'd like to clarify about HIPAA. HIPAA protects your protected health information from being shared by your insurer, your employer, your medical professional. Any person can ask somebody, why are you not wearing a mask? And they can tell them. The business owner doesn't have to be afraid to ask somebody, and somebody can't use HIPAA as an excuse because that's protected health information that's shared within employers and medical professionals and insurers. And also, as far as the ADA goes, if the restaurant offers a alternative, say you could get your food to go, you can wait outside and we will bring it out to you, or you can call if they deliver. That's a reasonable alternative. So that's kind of throws that out too.
Any other legal advice, Mary?
Point of order. Point of order.
Mayor,
Who's talking?
I just asked.
Mayor,
Yes.
I just want to chime in here and go on record as saying that I think the city should have no role in this whatsoever, police department, or yourself for that matter. We should let the informed citizens and business owners of this city make their own decisions about how they want to respond to this directive.
Thank you. Any other discussion on this? Discussion from the public. No discussion from the public. We'll call the discussion on the COVID-19 over. Time for public comments. Thank you.
Don't need a time.
Public comment, Kevin.
Not COVID related.
Okay.
It's about skate park.
Yes.
I wanted to give you an update. What if? We're currently at about 125,000, and we are anticipating possibly reducing the total amount that we are going to try to get to build park. Just got off the phone. Can you take this off?
Yeah.
Thank you. I just got off the phone with the builder, and he's trying to put something together, and he would like to know if he could start to do construction in 3 to 4 weeks. Will that be a problem with COVID? If they're outside construction?
No,
That's exempt?
that is.
Okay. The other issue that he raised is that because he's going to try to possibly scale down this design so that we can make it fit, there may be some perimeter between the sidewalk and the structure that will have to be landscaped by us. We didn't want to originally do that. We put it all in the company, wanted to do it all into concrete, but he said it'd be nice to have a buffer, and that would aid in the fact that you don't need a fence there. The parts that they have built in suburban and urban environments traditionally have some landscaping around the outside, traditionally grass. And I said, if we're going to do grass, then I have to have irrigation. I need irrigation. Bushnell, can I get water?
Well, there would
get
be
water to me, it's going to hurt.
There would be access to do it, but we'd have to put in a water service to that property. I mean, it could be done.
How much would that cost?
Well, probably a couple $1,000 to get it put in where I would have to go there, just like the park across the street in a meter pit, which have removable to keep from freezing the winter, but there'd be an irrigation system just similar to what's over at the park.
Would that be possible?
It would be possible to do, yes. I would have to do a little more, but I know there's water lines access. I mean, there's water mains in the
I
area.
did not anticipate this, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it
That's
could
what
be done. If that was a must, it could be done, but it'd be a couple $1,000 investment to get it put in.
Okay, okay. I think we could probably, skate park people can come with that money. The builder said he would replace the sidewalk as well, because we're going to have to tear the sidewalk.
Tom?
I'm all in favor of the skate park, but I'm just wondering, is there any reason why we have to do that? Why isn't the fence as it stands acceptable?
We're going to have to remove the fence anyway.
Right.
Not all of it. We're gonna have to remove the fence at least on one side, probably on 8th Street side. We're gonna have to get machinery in there. Beartooth Electric has volunteered. They said they're going to, they are going to remove the slab. And talking to Joe, I thought we were going to remove only some and cut the slab so that we have a smaller area in the existing concrete. But because of the shape of this thing, that won't really work. We're going to have some sloping around the outside of it in grass. The reason for removing the fence permanently is just that is the preference of leaving that to the preference of Montana Skate Park Association preference, Montana Pool Service preference, and Evergreen Skate Park builders. That doesn't mean we can't put the fence back, but the new parks don't have fences. They don't need them. It's just the way they're constructed. And this builder, who is very reputable, said he's just finished his 75th park. He said, I don't have any fences around any of my parks, whether it be in an urban or a rural environment. We just don't, because the way we design them, you don't need it.
Okay, does it also, is the design also going to impinge on the existing sidewalk?
No, it can't.
Okay.
I've stated, no, it cannot go into.
So the grass strip, whatever you design.
I anticipate we're gonna have to do some grassing
inside the current.
Inside the sidewalk. We don't want to, we have to preserve the sidewalk. I know we want to preserve the sidewalk.
Yeah. Okay.
Can they use artificial turf in that area?
He's leaving that to me.
I was just saying, if it needs a buffer and that artificial turf needs no water and can be maintained.
That's a possibility. I don't know about artificial turf that, at some point it'd have to be replaced too, but, it's got about 10 year lifespan. And it would depend on the sloping, and that is a possibility we could explore. I don't know what cost-wise, what the difference would be. I think it would be, I can almost bet it would be cheaper to put in grass than to put in plastic grass.
Let's take a look at it.
Yeah.
And maintenance-wise, yeah, the park will have to be mowed and maintained by this board. It will have to be done by it will have to be done by the user group.
Tom?
Well, that was my question, is that if it was artificial, then it wouldn't require maintenance in terms of mowing and water, and that sort of thing.
True. It will probably require some maintenance. Artificial grasses not without maintenance.
Right, but you're
especially on slope.
are we looking at like this much of a strip?
That's a big question. I can't tell you until that design is done, and I've really pushed him heavily today to show me something. So I think when that drawing comes in, I was going to share that with all the council anyway, for sure. So if he wants to do that within the next month, I said, well, then we better get going. So that's kind of what we're at.
All right. Good. Thank you.
Are we going to have any trouble with slab removal? Will we be able to close the street if we have to temporarily for any of that construction? And I'll try this, and I'm trying now to get to show. I want to show some written agreements between ourselves and the donors that say that money is absolutely going to be available.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. You've done a great deal of work on this.
That man.
Okay, you both have, but we really appreciate it. It's the most comprehensive conversations we've ever had about the skate park. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for supporting us.
Dale, did you have a question or a comment?
I apologize, the technology, it took me a bit to figure out how to get something to chat or video, so I appreciate you acknowledging me, Mayor. First of all, I would hope in the future, Mayor, that if a city employee makes a public snide comment to one of our public servants, that you set a better tone of professionalism in the chambers. That was really disappointing to witness. And I think that your leadership has been, is higher caliber of that, and I hope in the future that you reprimand somebody to being disrespectful like that. On a second note, I wanted to thank you for the work that you did with the task force on Monday to rectify, I think, what was a very serious condition over the weekend. One of the things that is absent from the statement, though, is really an acknowledgement of a statement of the problem of what happened over the weekend. Public safety is built on public trust, and public trust requires transparency, accountability, and equity. And part of accountability is that humility of acknowledging when we as leaders have fallen short. And over the weekend, you know, there was a series of mistakes made that really jeopardized our public safety. And as leaders, I have a great appreciation for humility and for that modeling, particularly of people with power. And, you know, right now, all of you who are in key positions of power around COVID have positional power, are white men, and that is actually another level of power. And so when you come forward and admit when something fell short and then commit to the difference, it does a huge amount of good to building public trust. And that accounting of where it fell short and then apologizing is one of the sort of biggest things we can do for public trust. And I hope that you're able to do that. I think modeling it is really actually vital in bringing our community together. Secondly, you know, I hope that you spent some time over the weekend looking at some of the images of how close people were, that when our community members were walking down the street protesting, bikers were right up against them. And regardless of how people feel about that event, from a COVID standpoint, there should have been an interference. And it's well documented, it's videotaped, and it didn't happen. And some of our people who were walking should be able to walk and not have somebody get up in their face like that during COVID.
Okay.
And so, thank you.
3 minutes are up. Thank you, Jael.
Appreciate it, Mayor.
Thank you. Do we have anything on the chats?
Chancellor Bell, do officers need to be masked? Whoa, sorry. Ellie. Jen Bettles asked, do officers need to be masked when interacting with the public?
Jason, would you like to address that for us, please?
So if the officers are outside, again, no masks are required on the outside. One of the things that's important to understand is that in law enforcement, when we deal with people, we often don't know if they have disabilities at the time. And a clear voice command is very, very important, that we have very clear voice commands when we're dealing with an individual. And so oftentimes we don't know if that person is deaf or partially deaf and needs to read lips. The other thing is that when we give our commands, they need to be very precise and very crisp when we do that. As you hear talking with people, masks hinder all of the things that I just said. And so oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes officers do need to respond and communicate with people without masks so that we can communicate clearly, and so that if they do have problems, they can read our lips, or that we can assess the scene in that way. So not all the times, our officers do wear masks if they're going into a store to purchase things, or of that nature. But when outside, they are not required to wear masks, and when dealing with people, such as traffic stops, they are not also required to wear masks. I think Ms. Nairmore also explained the importance of that in the governor's story that we read as far as under emergency situations. And anytime that we're dealing with public is usually in that type of thing, other than just communicating or visiting with somebody.
And were you given a class on this?
Well, in 20-some years, 23 years of law enforcement, communication is very important. And again, dealing with people, knowing that that's sometimes important, yes, it is important to do that.
And you did have Dr. George come in and talk with your men?
We actually did have Dr. George come in and give our officers a briefing exactly as to what is to be done. And like you said, that was done, as well as we've done additional updates since then as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So there's just other comments. Stephanie Nassel, I agree with what JL is saying. Willis Johnson, I agree with JL's statement regarding public official decorum. Beth Seam said, thank you, JL. Nate Davis, I concur with JL's statement regarding the city attorney's behavior in this meeting. Leadership needs to be shown here. Ellie Elliott, this is a long one, and I believe she emailed this earlier, but I can read it. She said, thank you for posting the budget on the city website. I hope that we can engage in vital discussion for accountability in the budgeting process for Red Lodge, especially as the current challenges of 2020 bring changes to revenue availability and a variety of needs in our county. In the interest of fiscal responsibility, I am concerned that budget decisions are made on the basis of full reporting, especially for the largest portions of the budget. I see that by far the largest portion goes to the police department, nearly $700,000. I wonder where the full reporting and the data are available to justify the staffing level that creates this level of expenditure. I hope that you and the council will require a full report and complete data before approving this level of expenditure. If such a full report already exists, where is it available? Thank you for your work and service to Red Lodge. And then Ellie also said, I would also have appreciated a response to the disrespect shown to a council member. Willis Johnson said, if a mask is not ideal for law enforcement, have you considered face shields?
I think that's a good question. That's something that probably in our Thursday meeting with Dr. George that we can address that.
JL said, what is the process if the public witness police in businesses without masks? How will that be corrected publicly so that public trust is rebuilt?
Do that one more time.
Right. What is the process if the public witness police in businesses without masks? How will that be corrected publicly so that public trust is rebuilt?
So as long as we know who the officer is, and we will have a conversation with them here.
And Susan Hill, I agree with JL's statement. And that's all I got.
Okay. Any other public comments? Pete.
Pete Fratelli, 5 Villard Avenue North. May I comment on the skate park?
Yes.
When considering to remove the fence, whether to replace it or not, one thing to take into consideration is that if the fence is there, an out-of-control boarder will be contained and not shoot through a parked car and get hit. So I'm not advocating the fence be put back or not, but it is a consideration for safety, because if they're contained, there's only one way in and one way out.
Okay. Thank you, Pete.
Pete, I can say that the reason the fence was put there was for that exact reason, but I understand the design does not allow people to go flying in the streets.
And I haven't seen the design, so.
I haven't seen the design. I've only had a conceptual drawing. But I can tell you that new skate park design, the edges of all these structures are pretty vertical. And the way they design them that way so the person doesn't move it. And this builder has not had an issue. If we do have an issue, we're gonna replace the fence.
That's fine, I just wanted to toss that out there.
Yeah, absolutely, and that question has been raised before, so,
Thank you.
of all the parks we've had, that he's built, and even the competitive companies, they just don't have that issue with the new designs.
Any other public comment?
Hope Smith asked, is Ellie's question about a report going to be answered? How about Willis's question about face shields?
I answered about the face shields, that we'll take that up with Dr. George.
And the report, Jason, I don't know if that was regarding the police budget.
I don't have a report yet, I mean.
And I'll get you that email, Jason.
I think
On our first budget meeting, we had all the department heads present their budgets and answer questions at that time. We've gone through the enterprise funds, were our last budget meeting, which was last week. We'll have another meeting on that in August, and we'll move forward from there. I will pass that email along to Jason.
Jails, that speaking to a police officer happens in private and doesn't necessarily contribute to public trust. How will the public know that there is a change in behavior from the officer? Will they be expected to apologize to business owners, for instance? Is there another way to make transparent accountability? This might be a question for the chief along with the mayor.
Well, we'll definitely look over the question, yeah.
Okay, Jen Battles. I'd like to point out to the council that the draft collective bargaining agreement entitles our officers paid sick leave should they be quarantined with COVID. The rest of us don't have the privilege of taxpayer subsidized sick leave if we get COVID because we were forced to interact with an unmasked officer.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Any more public comment? We'll call her done. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lonnie, for your reading.